Billionaire CEO calls black waitress stupid, but karma cost him $2 billion. The bell above the door of the Daily Grind Cafe chimed a cheerful, almost naive little tune, announcing the arrival of a man who was anything but. Arthur Sterling, a name synonymous with corporate ruthlessness and a fortune so vast it could swallow small countries, stepped inside, bringing with him an aura of cold, sterile power that seemed to suck the warmth right out of the cozy, coffee-scented air. His suit was a whisper of tailored silk and quiet dominance, a stark contrast to the worn wooden floors and mismatched chairs that gave the cafe its humble charm. He scanned the room with an impatient flick of his eyes, his expression one of utter disdain, as if the very act of breathing this common air was a personal affront to his billionaire status. His gaze landed on Sarah, a young woman whose smile was as genuine as the morning sun, though her eyes held a quiet weariness that spoke of long hours and little rest. She was in the middle of wiping down a table, her movements efficient and graceful. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Daily Grind. What can I get for you today?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, a melody of politeness in the quiet hum of the cafe. Sterling didn't return the greeting. He simply strode to the counter, his expensive leather shoes making sharp, accusatory clicks on the linoleum. He pointed a manicured finger at the menu board without truly looking at it. "Espresso. Double shot. And make it quick. I don't have all day to watch you people play at being business owners." His tone was clipped, each word a tiny, sharp icicle meant to chill. Before we dive deeper into this journey, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she expertly reassembled it. "Of course, sir. One double espresso, coming right up." She moved with a practiced calm, her hands steady as she prepared the drink. The rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filled the space between them, a fragrant peace offering that Sterling completely ignored. He was too busy tapping his platinum credit card on the counter, a rhythmic, irritating sound that broadcasted his impatience to the entire cafe. The few other patrons shifted uncomfortably, their quiet conversations dwindling into silence. When Sarah placed the small, steaming cup before him, her hand accidentally brushed against his. Sterling recoiled as if he'd been touched by something unclean. He glared at the cup, then at her. "Is this a joke? I asked for a double shot. This cup is barely half full. Are you incapable of understanding a simple instruction? Or are you just stupid?" The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Stupid. It echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the room. Every eye was on them. Sarah felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck, but she met his cold, cruel gaze with a surprising stillness. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, yet it carried an unshakable dignity. "I apologize, sir. The volume is correct for a concentrated double espresso. Perhaps you were expecting a different type of drink? I can remake it for you." "Don't bother," Sterling sneered, his lip curling. He threw a $100 bill onto the counter, a gesture of pure contempt. "Keep the change. Maybe you can use the money to buy a brain." He turned on his heel, the bell chiming his departure as mockingly as it had announced his arrival. The door swung shut, leaving a wake of stunned silence and humiliation. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her hands clenched into tight fists beneath the counter. The $100 bill felt like a brand, a searing mark of his arrogance. As the cafe slowly returned to its gentle rhythm, the other customers offering her sympathetic glances, Sarah stared at the door he had just walked through. A single, tearless breath escaped her lips. She whispered to the empty space, her voice trembling with a knowledge he could never comprehend, if he only knew. Arthur Sterling stormed out of the cafe, the trivial encounter already fading from his mind, replaced by the colossal weight of a deal that would redefine his legacy. He slid into the back of his waiting Maybach, the plush leather interior a world away from the cheap linoleum he had just graced with his presence. "To the office, James," he barked, and the city began to blur past his tinted window, a muted canvas of lesser lives he had no time for. His mind was a fortress of numbers and strategies, all centered on the impending acquisition of Aerodyne Global, a move that would not just make him richer, but would cement his name in the annals of corporate history. It was a $2 billion gambit, a king's ransom, but the potential payoff was a tenfold increase in his already obscene fortune. The deal was nearly his. All the shareholders had bent to his will, seduced by the sheer power of his offer. All but one. This final infuriating obstacle was a ghost, an enigma known to the financial world only as the Guardian. This mysterious entity held a 20% stake in Aerodyne, a position inherited decades ago, now worth a staggering sum. More importantly, it was the deciding vote. The Guardian had remained silent, communicating only through a single tight-lipped lawyer who deflected every inquiry with maddeningly polite stonewalling. For a man like Sterling, who believed every person had a price and every secret could be unearthed with enough money, the Guardian was a source of profound, escalating frustration. He had spent a small fortune on private investigators, but they had come back with nothing but whispers and dead ends. The Guardian was a phantom, a wisp of smoke, holding the key to his ultimate triumph. This single unknown variable was a crack in the otherwise perfect architecture of his ambition, and it was driving him to the edge of his formidable patience. Miles away, in a small second-floor apartment that smelled of old books and lavender, Sarah kicked off her worn-out work shoes. The sting of Sterling's insult still lingered, a dull ache in her chest, but it was an old familiar pain. She had weathered worse storms. She moved to a small wooden chest in the corner of her living room, her sanctuary from the harshness of the world. From it, she pulled a worn, leather-bound photograph album. She gently opened it to a picture of a woman with a radiant smile and eyes that held the same quiet strength as her own. The woman was dressed in an elegant silk gown, a string of pearls around her neck, standing on the marble steps of a mansion that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. It was her mother, from a life before everything was lost, a life of immense wealth and privilege that now felt like a dream. Sarah traced the outline of her mother's face, a silent conversation passing between them. This photo was her only tangible link to that other world, a world where men like Arthur Sterling would have bowed, not sneered. It was a reminder of the great fortune that had vanished, leaving her with nothing but memories and a legacy of quiet resilience. Back in his sterile glass-walled office overlooking the city, Sterling's focus was shattered by a sharp ping from his computer. An email. The subject line was stark, a message from the Guardian. His heart hammered against his ribs. He clicked it open, his eyes devouring the words. The message was not from the lawyer. It was direct, and it was chillingly personal. It contained only 2 sentences, a cryptic message that seemed to reach through the screen and grip him by the throat. Mr. Sterling, it read, your conduct does not go unnoticed. The Guardian is aware of your actions today, and a decision regarding the Aerodyne vote will be made shortly. The email landed in Arthur Sterling's world like a precision-guided missile, shattering his composure. Your actions today. The words replayed in his mind, each repetition amplifying his paranoia. What actions? The dismissive wave to his doorman? The curt dismissal of his junior analyst? Then the memory surfaced, unpleasant and insignificant until this very moment. The cafe. The girl. The insult. It couldn't be. The idea was absurd, a laughable coincidence. How could a nobody waitress in a rundown coffee shop have any connection to the shadowy powerhouse holding his $2 billion dream hostage? It was impossible. And yet, the specificity of the message, your actions today, gnawed at him, a venomous seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of his arrogance. For the first time in his life, Arthur Sterling felt a tremor of fear, the unnerving sensation of being watched by an unseen power he could not control, intimidate, or buy. His response was immediate and overwhelming. He unleashed the full force of his immense resources, a financial shockwave aimed at a single phantom target. I want to know who the Guardian is, he roared at his head of security, a man accustomed to burying problems, not excavating ghosts. I don't care what it costs. Use every asset, every contact, every dirty little trick in our book. I want a name, a face, and a weakness. I want to know what they had for breakfast. Find them. The order sent his vast network of investigators, hackers, and informants into a frenzy. They scoured financial records, delved into encrypted databases, and chased down decades-old rumors across continents. They were the best bloodhounds money could buy, yet the Guardian's trail was impossibly clean. Every lead evaporated. Every potential identity was a dead end. It was as if the person existed outside the grid, a digital and financial specter. With each passing day, Sterling's paranoia grew into a raging inferno. He saw shadows in his boardroom, heard whispers in the static of his phone calls. The Aerodyne deal, once a symbol of his ultimate power, was now a ticking time bomb, and he was chained to it. His empire, built on a foundation of ruthless certainty, suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable to a force he couldn't even identify. While Sterling was being consumed by his own manufactured darkness, Sarah was living in the light. That week she noticed that Maria, one of the other waitresses, was quieter than usual, her eyes puffy and red-rimmed. During a shared break, Sarah gently asked what was wrong. Maria confessed that her son had broken his arm, and the unexpected medical bill was a devastating blow. She was behind on rent and was terrified of being evicted. She spoke of the impossible choice between keeping a roof over her family's head and getting her son the follow-up care he needed. Sarah listened with a heavy heart, seeing her own past struggles reflected in Maria's fear. That evening, she went to the bank. She looked at her meager savings account, a small cushion she had painstakingly built over years of scrimping and saving. It was her emergency fund, her sliver of security in an insecure world. Without a second thought, she withdrew nearly all of it. The next day, she slipped an envelope into Maria's locker. Inside was the exact amount for the rent and the medical bill, along with a simple, anonymous note: "Sometimes we all need a little help. Stay strong." Maria later wept with gratitude to the entire staff, never knowing who her angel was. Sarah simply smiled, feeling a sense of richness that no amount of money could ever buy. Back in his penthouse, surrounded by opulent, soulless art, Sterling was a caged lion. The pressure was becoming unbearable. His phone rang, the caller ID flashing the name of his lead investigator, a grizzled ex-intelligence officer named Corbin. "What do you have?" Sterling demanded, his voice raw. Corbin's voice was low, laced with a strange mix of frustration and discovery. "Sir, we've been looking for a living person. We were wrong. The trail doesn't lead to a person, it leads to a document." Sterling gripped the phone tighter. "What document?" There was a pause, the silence stretching for an eternity. "It's an old last will and testament, sir. From over 20 years ago. The name that controls the trust, the name that is the guardian. It's a name you know very well." The investigator's words struck Arthur Sterling with the force of a physical blow. A name he knew very well. His mind, a finely tuned machine for calculation and strategy, raced through a Rolodex of enemies, rivals, and former allies. But the name Corbin finally uttered over the phone was one he had buried deep in the recesses of his memory, encased in a tomb of guilt and willful ignorance. "Eleanor," Corbin said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Eleanor Vance. Your first wife." Sterling sank into his chair, the breath knocked from his lungs. Eleanor. It was impossible. He had married her when he was just starting his climb, drawn to her family's old money and the quiet grace she possessed. But her gentle nature had quickly become an irritant to his burgeoning ambition. He had found her kindness weak, her empathy a liability. He had been cruel, dismissive, and emotionally vacant, systematically dismantling her spirit until she was a shadow of her former self. Their divorce had been swift and brutal. He had used his superior lawyers to leave her with almost nothing, a pittance that was an insult to the wealth she had brought into their union. He had heard years later that she had passed away, a quiet, lonely death in obscurity. The news had barely registered, a minor footnote in the grand epic of his success. The idea that she, the woman he had discarded like a worn-out coat, could be the architect of this existential threat to his empire was beyond comprehension. "She died penniless," Sterling stammered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I made sure of it. This is a mistake. A ghost can't control a multi-billion-dollar fortune." Corbin's voice remained steady. "It's no mistake, sir. The shares weren't in her name directly. They were part of a blind trust established by her father, with a unique stewardship clause. She was the designated beneficiary, but the control, the identity of the guardian, was passed on according to her final written instructions. We just can't find those instructions." Sterling's world tilted on its axis. The ghost of his forgotten wife had returned, not as a specter in the night, but as a titan of finance, poised to bring his kingdom crashing down. In her quiet apartment, far from the frantic energy of Sterling's investigation, Sarah was also communing with the past. The incident at the cafe had stirred something within her, a need to reconnect with the mother she had lost so young. She opened the old wooden chest again, but this time she bypassed the photo album. Her fingers searched beneath a stack of her mother's favorite silk scarves, their scent now faint, and found what she was looking for, a small diary bound in faded blue leather. Her mother, Eleanor, had given it to her just before she died, her hand trembling as she pressed it into Sarah's. "This is for when you're older," she had whispered, her voice weak. It holds the truth of who I was, and the secret to who you can be." Sarah had been too young to understand, and the diary had remained unread, a sacred but painful relic. Now, she felt a pull she could no longer ignore. She opened the book, the pages brittle with age. Her mother's elegant script filled the pages, not with bitterness or regret, but with reflections on kindness, resilience, and the true meaning of wealth. It was the story of a woman who had lost everything but her soul. As Sarah read, she pieced together the story of her mother's quiet suffering and her unwavering grace in the face of Sterling's cruelty. She read about her mother's deep-seated belief that true power wasn't in hoarding riches, but in wielding compassion. Then, near the end of the diary, Sarah found a passage that made her heart stop. Her mother had written it in the final weeks of her life, her handwriting shaky but determined. "My darling Sarah," it began, "I fear I won't be here to see you grow, but I have left you a legacy more powerful than any bank account. Your father believes he took everything from me. He is wrong. He never understood that the greatest assets are not held in a vault. If something should happen to me, know that the key to everything, the key to our future and his reckoning, is not in the money he so desperately worships, but in a single act of kindness I performed a long, long time ago." Sarah's eyes widened, a sudden shocking realization dawning in her mind. The passage ended there, a cryptic breadcrumb left by a ghost, and Sarah was left staring at the words, her breath caught in her throat, the entire world shifting beneath her feet. The diary became Sarah's entire world. She read and reread the cryptic passage, the words imprinting themselves onto her soul. An act of kindness. The phrase was so quintessentially her mother, a woman who had moved through life leaving a trail of quiet good deeds. But which one? Which single act held the key to a multi-billion-dollar empire and the fate of the man who had destroyed her? Sarah spent the next 2 days poring over every page, every memory her mother had committed to paper. She read about Eleanor volunteering at soup kitchens, donating her last few dollars to a homeless musician, and secretly paying for a neighbor's medical treatment. Each story was a testament to her mother's character, but none seemed to hold the magnitude, the strategic foresight, that the final passage hinted at. The search felt hopeless, a quest for a single raindrop in a forgotten storm. Just as she was about to give up, her fingers brushed against a small stiff pocket sewn into the back cover of the diary. It was almost invisible. With trembling hands, she carefully worked it open and pulled out a single folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was a letter, written in her mother's hand. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you have found my final secret." The act of kindness was not small, and it was not random. It was a lifeline I threw, not for myself, but for the future. The letter went on to tell a story from long before Sarah was born. Her mother, using a small inheritance her own father had shielded from Sterling, had given a significant sum of money to a brilliant but struggling young inventor named Alastair Finch. He was a visionary, a man with world-changing ideas but no capital, on the verge of losing everything. Eleanor had seen his genius and his integrity. She made him a deal. She would fund his fledgling technology company, asking for nothing in return but a promise. The promise was the core of her secret will, a masterpiece of patient, long-term justice. Alastair was to build his empire. He was to acquire, over time, a significant controlling interest in whatever company Arthur Sterling eventually built. He was to operate from the shadows, his identity as the major shareholder a closely guarded secret, becoming the entity she had christened the Guardian. The letter explained that Alastair, now a reclusive and incredibly wealthy millionaire himself, owed his entire success to Eleanor's initial faith. The promise he made was that he would hold his voting power in trust. He would watch over Arthur Sterling, and if the day ever came that Sterling performed an act of profound cruelty, an act that proved he had not changed, control of the Guardian's vote would pass to the only person Eleanor truly trusted, her daughter. The incident at the cafe, Sterling's casual, public humiliation of a working woman, had been the trigger. Alastair, ever watchful, had seen it as the final damning proof of Sterling's unchanged character. Sarah stared at the letter, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with dizzying speed. Her mother hadn't just left her a diary, she had left her an inheritance of power beyond imagination. The fate of Arthur Sterling's empire, his entire fortune, was now resting in her hands. The letter concluded with a final, startling instruction, a phone number. "Alastair has been waiting for you your entire life," her mother wrote. "He will know what to do. Trust him as I did." Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of shock, grief, and a terrifying sense of destiny. She, a humble waitress, had the power to ruin the billionaire who had insulted her, the man who had broken her mother's heart. The irony was staggering, a karmic tidal wave decades in the making. Her hand shook as she picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the numbers. For a moment, she hesitated, the sheer weight of the decision pressing down on her. Then, thinking of her mother's quiet strength, of Maria's tears of relief, of the cold, dead look in Sterling's eyes, she took a deep breath and made the call. It rang only once. A kind, elderly voice, warm and steady, answered on the other end. "Hello, Sarah," the voice said, filled with a gentle reverence. "I was hoping you would call. I've been waiting for a very long time." The air in the main conference room of Sterling Industries was thick with a tension that even the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the city, could not dissipate. Arthur Sterling stood at the head of the vast mahogany table, his back ramrod straight, a marble statue of a man about to face his executioners. The board members, a collection of the city's most powerful figures, were already seated, their faces grim. The final vote on the Aerodyne Global acquisition was moments away, and the fate of the $2 billion deal hung by the thinnest of threads, the vote of the Guardian. Sterling had been summoned to this final humiliating meeting, not as a conqueror, but as a defendant. He had received a stark one-line message an hour earlier: the Guardian will render their decision in person. The sheer audacity of it, the theatricality, filled him with a cold dread. The grand doors of the conference room swung open. Sterling braced himself, expecting to see a rival he had crushed, a ghost from his corporate past returning for vengeance. He did not expect to see her. Sarah walked into the room, not in her simple waitress uniform, but in a modest, elegant dark blue dress that seemed to radiate a quiet confidence. She moved with the same unhurried grace he had seen in the cafe, but this time, it was not the grace of a servant, but of someone who owned the very ground she walked on. The board members stared, confused. Sterling's mind short-circuited. He opened his mouth to demand what she was doing here, to have security throw her out, but no words came. Following her was an assistant who placed a large monitor at the end of the table. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," the man said, his voice the same one Sarah had heard on the phone. "My name is Alastair Finch." A wave of recognition, and then horror, washed over Sterling. Alastair Finch. The tech genius who had vanished from the public eye decades ago, only to become a legend, a reclusive billionaire. "I am the man you have been searching for," Alastair continued calmly. "The one you call the Guardian. But I am merely the steward of this vote. The true power today belongs to someone else." Alastair's gaze shifted slightly, as if looking at Sarah, who now stood at the head of the table, directly opposite Sterling. "According to the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance, your former wife, the full voting rights of my shares in Aerodyne, the deciding vote, are now under the exclusive control of her daughter." He gestured with his head towards Sarah. "The decision is hers to make." The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Sterling stared at Sarah, the waitress he had called stupid, and finally saw the ghost of Eleanor in her eyes. He saw the same dignity, the same unbreakable spirit. This was his reckoning. It was all crashing down, his life's work, his legacy, his entire fortune, all resting in the hands of the young woman he had humiliated for sport. Sarah let the silence stretch, her calm gaze holding his. Then she spoke, her voice clear and steady, filling the cavernous room. "Mr. Sterling," she began, "my mother taught me that true wealth is not measured by what you have, but by what you give." She believed in compassion. "You called me stupid for a simple mistake." She paused, letting the memory hang between them. "Today, I will not seek revenge. That is not her legacy. I will teach you a lesson in value." She turned to the board. "I will vote to approve the merger." A collective sigh of relief went through the room, but Sarah raised a hand. "On two conditions. First, Mr. Sterling will immediately resign as CEO. Second, he will place half of his personal fortune into a new charitable foundation. A foundation that I will run." The color drained from Sterling's face. It was not ruin. It was something far worse, a public stripping of his power and a forced atonement, orchestrated by the daughter of the woman he had destroyed. The aftermath of the board meeting was a quiet earthquake that sent shockwaves through the financial world. Arthur Sterling, the titan of industry, the man whose name was synonymous with ruthless power, was gone. He accepted the terms, not out of a sudden change of heart, but because he was cornered, defeated by a ghost and her quiet, unassuming daughter. The humiliation was absolute, a public spectacle that stripped him of his crown and his identity. He vanished from the headlines, his resignation sending the market into a temporary frenzy before a new, more stable leadership took his place at the helm of the newly merged megacorporation. His fall was as swift and brutal as his rise had been. The billions he was forced to relinquish were transferred into a trust, the legal documents signed in a sterile office, a final silent transaction that officially ended his reign. 1 year later, the world looked profoundly different for both of them. The Eleanor Vance Foundation was a beacon of hope in the city. Led by Sarah, it moved with a purpose and efficiency that stunned the philanthropic community. She had inherited her mother's compassion, but also her father's strategic mind, and she wielded this unique combination to create real, measurable change. The foundation didn't just write checks, it built shelters, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, created job training programs, and provided interest-free loans to families facing medical crises. Sarah was no longer just a waitress. She was a force of nature, her work touching thousands of lives. She moved through her new world with the same humility and grace she had always possessed, her focus never on the money itself, but on the good it could accomplish. She found a deep, abiding joy in her work, a sense of purpose that made the memory of the cafe feel like a lifetime ago. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah was visiting a new homeless shelter the foundation had opened in the city's poorest district. As she helped serve lunch, she saw a familiar figure at the end of the line. It was Arthur Sterling. He was thinner, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there before, his expensive suits replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a worn sweater. He kept his eyes down, a man trying to be invisible. He took a tray, and as he moved down the line, he looked up and saw her. For a moment, their eyes met across the steam table. There was no anger in his gaze, no resentment. There was only a quiet, weary acceptance. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the new reality. Sarah learned from the shelter's director that he had been volunteering there for months, showing up every day, performing the most menial tasks without complaint. He scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and served meals to the very people he had once considered beneath his notice. He never spoke of his past life, his lost fortune, or the empire he had built. It was as if that man had died, and in his place was this quiet, humbled volunteer. He was, for the first time, finding a different kind of wealth, one that had nothing to do with stock prices or acquisitions. He was discovering peace, not in power, but in service. That evening, back in her modest apartment, the same one she had kept, Sarah looked at the faded photograph of her mother. She smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. The karmic debt had been paid, but the outcome was more profound than simple justice. It was about transformation. Her mother's legacy was not the fall of a cruel man, but the rise of a compassionate one, and the blossoming of a daughter who had learned that the greatest inheritance is a heart that knows how to give. The real legacy was never about the money. It was about the enduring, world-changing power of empathy. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, share this video and tell us in the comments, what part of this journey moved you the most? There's another story waiting for you, and I'm sure it will change the way you see the world. Thank you for watching and see you soon.